Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Downtown Parking Committee. Can we transition to the roll call?
Committee member Zarate.
Here.
Silver.
Here.
Newkirk.
Here.
Labrie.
Matt Labrie is here. There's audio issues that we're working on currently.
Pratt.
Here.
Chair Pinner is excused. And Vice Chair France.
Here. Great. With that, at this time, are there any changes to the agenda?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all being here this morning. There are no changes to the agenda for today.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Bossi. With that, we're looking for any public comment that is not directly related to any items on our agenda today. Ms. Clark, is there any public comment? And you are muted.
Good morning, Mr. France. If we go to the next slide, I'll just remind the public that if they'd like to participate in the meeting or make a comment, they can use the raise and lower your hand button that's located on their go to webinar control panel. You can see it up here on the presentation. When we see those hands raised, we will let you know that it's your turn to speak. So right now, I am not seeing any hands raised, so we don't have any public comment at this time.
Great, thank you. With that, I'll ask for approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of September 9th, 2021. I'll take any motions. Mr. Newkirk.
Thanks, Vice Chair. I move approval of minutes with one amendment to item 6, that the motion should have been carried with 4 yeas, 0 nays, and 1 abstention and 2 absences, as I abstained because I wasn't at the August 12th meeting. So with that one minor amendment, I move approval of the minutes.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Is there any further discussion or issue with the agenda or with the minutes? Great. Moving forward, the motion of the revised or amended minutes. All 4?
Aye.
Aye.
Committee member Zarate.
Aye.
Silver.
Aye.
Newkirk.
Yes.
Labrie.
Yes.
Pratt.
Yes.
And France.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So with that, we'll move to item 6, 2021 fiscal year end budget review.
Good morning, committee members. Sarah Clark will be with you in a second to present our year-end budget review for your peace of mind. So we're going to get right into that. Sarah's got a presentation all lined up for you. And with that, I will let Sarah take it away.
Thank you, Brian. So we finally have closed out fiscal year 2021. So we're going to today, in lieu of our usual monthly budget update, we're going to go back over where we ended the year for fiscal year 2021 and take note of any important changes. Megan, if you could just go ahead and advance the slide. Okay, and next slide, please. So we're going to start off, again, to sort of put all this in context with a little bit of discussion of occupancy. These are sort of the trends that are driving our revenues. So this is the monthly chart that we put up, so you can see here for September. And we've got some promising signs. If you look at the Saturday and Sunday numbers, we are basically back up to where we were before the pandemic. So on the weekends, our occupancy is strong. On the weekdays, however, we're still lagging. So that is going to be probably almost entirely attributable to, if not, we're sort of carrying it with the hourly parkers, to the loss of office workers and people who are working remotely and permit parking in the downtown, commuter parking. So you still see that we are, 10, 15, 20% in some cases below our occupancy prior to the pandemic for the weekdays. And then again, so that sort of remains a little bit of a wild card. We're seeing, visitor demand really coming back up to previous levels, while demand for employee parking remains low. So that it remains to be seen how that trend is going to continue. Next slide, please. So we're going to break this down a little bit differently for you. We're going to take a look at the past several months, so going back for about a year to October of 2020. This is how those numbers have been trending. So Monday to Thursday on weekdays, so you can see here kind of month by month, and the different bars represent the different hours during the day, how our occupancy has changed. So you can see we actually peaked in July. That was that sort of one of those wonderful months when we thought COVID might be behind us. And of course, with the usual increase in visitor traffic in the summer, we had a strong month in July, but we've now fallen back off of that a bit into the fall. So if you look at August and September. So if we move to the next slide. And again, that's for weekdays. So this is Saturday, so this is pretty representative of the weekend parking. We haven't seen as much of a drop off here for that. So again, that might have represented some office workers sort of tentatively beginning to go back into the office over the summer, and then, as the numbers with the virus rose, coming back out. So, we are up, generally speaking, across the board on weekends, and that's remaining pretty steady for the past few months. Next slide, please. So now let's get into where we finished out FY21. So I'm going to start by breaking down our revenues. And for this discussion, I'm really going to kind of be comparing where we landed to where we would land in kind of a quote unquote normal year, so a pre-COVID year. So rather than kind of trying to compare, kind of compare us to, for example, our budget, which is just already a big reduction because of COVID. I want to compare to pre-COVID to kind of give you a way to benchmark what that impact has been to the program. So if you look, 2019, the last year, full year we had before COVID, we had about $9.7 million in total revenue. In 2020, with about 3 months of COVID, that came down to 7.7. For FY21, we budgeted 7.7 million. We were, thinking, we were hoping for only a 25% decrease in revenue. Unfortunately, we ended up with a 47% decrease in revenue over where we would be in a usual year. So we finished the year at about $5.1 million in revenue. So if you can go ahead to the next slide. So let's take a look up close at a few of the key line items that are sort of driving that trend. These are, of course, largely the parking in our lots. So hourly revenue in a more normal year at about 5.2 million, 2019 for FY21, we finished at only 1.9 million. So that's a 63% decrease in hourly revenue over where we would normally be. Monthly and commuter parking showed similar trends. The impact of monthly parking was still steep, but not quite as steep. So that went from about 1.3 million per year to about 800,000 we made last year. And then for commuter parking, we're down about 54%. So very steep impacts there, going from about 369, 370 million, or not million, excuse me, we wish, thousand before the pandemic to only about 171,000 after. So those numbers are continuing to rebound, but the long-term outlook for people actually doing office work and commuting into downtown remains fairly uncertain at this point. And then finally, residential parking. So if you'll recall, back in the earlier days of the shutdown and over the winter surge last year with the sort of renewed stay-at-home orders, there was suspension of parking enforcement. So we didn't have quite the same demand for residential parking that we normally would. This is especially true in Area M, which serves the neighborhood surrounding City College, where the parking program is meant to deter student parking. Because we didn't have the students on campus for the most part last year, we suspended parking enforcement for them for the entire year. So you do see a bit of a drop in permit parking revenue for the residents because of that change in demand. So we do expect that to rebound a bit coming into the next year. So those are sort of the major changes to the revenues that are kind of driving the overall picture. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. So we're going to take a look at PBIA. This is something that the committee had requested to look at in a bit more depth. So we had been holding steady at about $1 million. There really had been fluctuation by only a few tens of thousands of dollars for several years prior to COVID hitting. So you can see, I believe these numbers start, the earliest that I was able to pull was fiscal year 2010. So at that point, we were coming up out of the recession. And also at that point, there was a change that was made to the engineer's report to adjust kind of some of the assessment rates. So, you know, we had some changes then. We were a bit lower then coming back out of the recession. So you see it recover up to around that $1 million mark. And we peaked in about FY15 with about $1.1 million in revenue. Like I said, it's held fairly steady since then. But then obviously you see that drop off once we hit FY20. So FY20, we waived that final quarter of assessments, which cost us about $250,000. And then for FY21, we only ended up getting about $683,000 in PBIA assessments because the first portion of that year, there was very little business activity happening downtown. Now, fortunately for us, it looks like that's rebounding. So far, you know, having gone through Q1 and we've gotten some, you know, some of the Q2 assessments I think have started to come in. We are at about $250,000 so far this year. So we're certainly on track to outperform that for next year. But our PBIA revenue, you can see, has taken quite a hit. So we can move to the next slide, please. So now let's get into expenditures. Again, looking at that 2019 COVID, sort of pre-COVID reference. You know, coming into FY20, because the pandemic hit late, we weren't able to make as many big adjustments to our expenditures as we would otherwise have been. We did manage to save about 5% over pre-COVID, you know, but not really a significant change there. Moving into FY21, we had budgeted for a 13% reduction. We ended up, fortunately, depending on how you look at it, being able to save about 22%. So we reduced expenditures to about 22% below pre-COVID levels. And we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about how exactly that kind of breaks down. So the major changes that we saw, permanent staff, we did hold a few positions open, but that didn't end up making a huge change for us with some other adjustments that took place. For hourly staffing, though, that of course is really the big one here. So in a pre-COVID year, we were spending about $1.7 million a year on our hourly staffing. For FY21, we spent less than $1 million. So we had a lot of savings there. Unfortunately, the reason that we had those savings was because we weren't able to fully staff the lots. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there as we continue, you know, to discuss and monitor our financial position. Right now, our inability to hire and fully staff the lots is really harming our ability to collect revenue, unfortunately. Credit cards, of course, also took a big hit. You know, fortunately, we didn't have to pay as many fees, but that was because we didn't have as many transactions out in the lots. So the city has negotiated a more favorable credit card processing rate. So there's some savings that are realized from that, but a lot of this really is just from the reduction in demand. So we went from about $181,000 a year for credit card fees in 2019 to FY 2021, only spending about $75,000. And then our ambassador program, the change isn't really applicable here because we didn't spend so much out of downtown parking's budget as a result of the extra funding that we received through the smoking grant, the smoking cessation grant. For FY 2021, though, we did budget a much higher expenditure, and we ended up not fully spending that money, again because of the reduction in staffing due to COVID, and as those smoking grant funds sort of expired, and we exhausted that resource. Supplies and services is an area where we are trying to be very cognizant and really reduce kind of discretionary purchases and just kind of pinch pennies wherever we can to try to save some money. So in a typical year prior to COVID, we spent about $650,000 on supplies and services generally, and then for FY21, we were able to save about 10% there. So we do have some savings realized there. We also had some changes in our budget. If you looked more in depth, kind of line item by line item, and I can give you that information if you'd like. We had some changes where we sort of moved some expenditures around. So it's looking like, for example, we're spending more in maintenance when really we've just moved some expenditures out of our capital program and up into our operating budget. So those are some other changes you'll see as you look more closely. So if we can move to the next slide. So to summarize where we finished up the year, overall for our operating budget, we ended up using about $1.8 million more than we took in. And then when you add to that $1.2 million in capital expenditures, we finished the year, the downtown parking fund finished the year having operated about $3 million in the red. So moving on to the next slide. Let's take a look at what that means for our reserves, and I have to put a big caveat on this. The final reserves position is we're not going to know that until at least December. So it's not just our revenues and expenditures that impact what our reserve balance is. There's a lot of other stuff that I frankly don't fully understand, but that is why we have the finance department who figures that out for us and calculates it for us, but we don't have those numbers available to us yet, and we likely won't until December. So for now, we're just going to assess estimated impacts based on that $3 million deficit that we saw from last year. So FY20, we ended fiscal year 20 with about $5.9 million in reserves. For FY21, we were required to have about $2.5 million in reserves, kind of sort of in the bank, so to speak. And the way that policy number is reached is that it is 15% of our operating budget for disaster reserves, another 10% of our operating budget for contingency reserves, and then sort of a moving average of our capital program, basically. So that's kind of all added together, and that gets you to what that required level is. And so what that means is that that policy requirement actually changes. So when we, for example, cut our expenditures like we did for the past fiscal year, the amount that we're required to keep in reserve per council policy actually drops. So we're going to look at that a little bit more. We've got everybody's favorite line graph coming up next, so we'll see how that's changed through the years. But just be advised that as our expenditures, may increase if, hopefully we're able to staff up and sort of have that recovery, that reserves number that we're required to keep is also going to increase. So the end of fiscal year 2021, we finished with $3.5 million in reserves above policy. So in FY21, at this point, again, we're estimating that we used about $3 million in reserves, which would leave us with a total reserves balance at the end of FY21 of about $2.8 million. And fortunately, right now, it looks like we squeaked out just above policy for the end of FY21. Again, these numbers aren't final, so if we come back in December and it's moved around, I apologize. For FY22, we are budgeted to use about $750,000 in reserves. And at this point so far, year to date, we are operating, I want to say, about $450,000 to the red. So at this point, in theory, we have sort of crossed that line and gone below those policy reserves. But again, things get adjusted as the year moves on, so that's not final yet. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So that's going to show our those sort of two lines that we've always watched to see when they would cross. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get data back further than FY17 for now. But if you look at the red line, that's our total reserves, and the blue line is what we're required to keep in policy reserve. So you can see, obviously, you can see the trajectory of the red line. Once we hit FY20, that really starts to go down, although we did, we did also run a deficit in 2019. And then if you look at that blue line for where our policy reserves are, again, as I described in the last slide, you'll see that actually drop. Previously, we were up at about between 3 and 4 million, about 3.5 million in required policy reserves, but that's down closer to $2 million now. So that number has dropped, and again, you can sort of see those lines crossing sometime in FY22. So that's sort of what we're on track for right now in terms of our reserves position. So that is all that I have for you today for this presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Matt Labrie.
Vice Chair. Ms. Clark, and maybe a question for Mr. Bossy also, going into the pandemic, staff came up with a kind of a plan to manage the kind of the tailspin of revenue. And at this point in the game, I'm curious if staff has kind of reopened that discussion. Are there tweaks and adjustments, or are you really just kind of reacting to what's happening as it comes at you? Can you give us a sense of the go forward adjustments that you might be considering?
Sure. So that 5-year sort of fiscal sort of strategic plan was based on largely on the type of demand and the demand for services that we had prior to the pandemic. So we had assumed, for example, certain levels of demand for monthly parking. It assumed certain levels of demand for hourly parking, and it made estimates of additional revenues based on that. So obviously those assumptions kind of no longer hold. So that is something that we need to reevaluate going forward. We are moving into the part of the year where we start to work on our budget for next year. So that is something that we are going to be looking very closely at, how we need to rebalance those efforts. Obviously correcting our financial position is our highest priority, and getting us back on good footing and adding back to reserves so that we can resume a more robust capital program and also maintain fiscal sustainability. That's very important to us. So yes, we will absolutely be reopening that. And some of it, for example, the option of introducing some automation to our lots. Obviously, we are underway with those efforts. So I don't know, Mr. Bossy, if you want to add anything.
No, I think Sarah pretty much summed it up about as good as it gets. So I would just take away from that wonderful summary, and I don't want to do that. So thanks, Sarah.
Okay. Mr. Newkirk.
Yeah, so thanks for the report, Sarah. It's obviously, pretty concerning, and especially looking at that, commuter use. And, I certainly question whether that'll ever rebound. I don't know that a lot of places will ever go back to the same type of office operations that we did pre-pandemic. So with that in mind, and also thinking that we've essentially lost 2 surface slots, or are in the process of losing 2 surface slots for their housing and the new police station. Has there been any consideration of selling surface slots, and what that process would be and what type of revenue we could generate? I'm thinking that there's quite a lot of value, particularly towards meeting arena requirements in the 6th housing cycle and in developing housing downtown. Surface lots just strike me as, I know historically their usage is really high as a percentage of the spaces compared to the garages, but just as a land use, they're pretty inefficient. And if we were to try to build up reserves in a kind of a one-off situation, it seems to me like those surface lots are primed for redevelopment as mixed use and or housing development downtown, which would then help our commercial businesses and kind of overall improve the picture downtown. So is that under consideration? I'm looking at the zoning. It's not zoned specifically for like a public use. So it seems like it has potentially the appropriate zoning to get redeveloped. So has there been any consideration of that, or might that be something we should start thinking about?
So there is certainly nothing specific under consideration. Obviously, as you mentioned, we have the police station that'll be coming into the Coda lot, the housing development that's been approved for the Carrillo lot. And, as you mentioned, with the sort of rebalancing of parking demand and the perhaps permanent drop in commuter demand, that is, in a certain sense, I guess, fortuitous for us because, we had already decided that those two lots were going to be repurposed. And so now we have the ability to move the commuter demand that we have into some of our other lots and adapt to that. As to the rest of our surface lots, there's nothing specific that's in discussion, but certainly, I think when the city has needs or goals that require use of a piece of land, the parking lots tend to be the first place that they look. So, while I wouldn't say that there's anything specific in the pipeline, it would not surprise me if there weren't other similar projects in the future that came down with those lots in mind and with a different use for those lots in mind. So I don't know, Brian, if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, that's a good point. I think the city as a whole generally doesn't let go of their land holdings, but as we've seen over the past couple of years and even couple weeks here, as Sarah mentioned, the parking lots seem to be kind of the first to be put on the block. So I think your ideas, Mr. Newkirk, are very creative, and I think we're going to have to see how our community comes out of this pandemic or how it reacts. Are we going to have commuters returning? I know that was mentioned earlier. We're going to see how people engage with coming downtown. So I think those are all, as we move forward, those are all things that could be considered by the city in the future, especially with looking to develop downtown, and those surface lots, as you said, are kind of ripe for that. Maybe a mixed use, some parking, some housing, and things like that. So I think those are all kind of on the block as we move forward. Obviously, first we want to secure our situation with getting employees, filling our kiosks, and start to generate that revenue that we're currently missing out on. So I think we got to take those baby steps first, and then move forward from there.
And I would note that as downtown changes, we might not see the commuter parking rebound to where we saw it, but we may see other types of demand. There's a lot of pressure to do some residential redevelopment downtown, add additional higher density units downtown. And while those things may be able to be constructed without parking, in our experience, many people still do want to have a car, even if they don't need to use it on a regular basis. And so, we are always looking to how we can make the best use of the parking supply that we have. So maybe that additional capacity it might end up being put to good use by other uses in downtown. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that and sort of adapt our offerings the way that we have by offering the new 24/7 permits for exactly that, for sort of residential use downtown going into the future. So we do want to optimize the way those spaces are used and make the best use of the lots that we have.
Are there any other questions at this time? Seeing that, I'd like to ask if there's any public comment.
Okay, Mr. France, let me go ahead and see. So if any member of the public wishes to speak on this item, go ahead and use the raise lower your hand button. And I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Clark. With that, I'll open the floor for comments. Questions and comments are so often so similar. Well, I will say thank you, Ms. Clark. Thank you, Mr. Bossy, to all, and thanks all of the downtown parking team. What a challenging last year and a half, and all these numbers and all of the different implications can be pretty daunting. Kind of a 1, 2, 3 punch between the parking revenue, the PBIA assessment, and the inability to fully staff, which is certainly a major portion of the revenue that we're not able to bring in, even when there is parking being used, not at the full level, but whatever that might be. I will say, I think, I say this every single meeting. Prior to COVID, we were thinking about how we can really beef up our reserves because of upcoming capital expenses that can't be paid out of former funds like the redevelopment agency. So if we want to do something, and we're not just the parking lots, we're the Paseos, we're the promenade, we're a lot of downtown. If we want to have options, we need to have reserves, and we're in a pretty tight spot. So I really appreciate you all coming through this so quickly, even with these provisional numbers, just to help us get set up for this. Our next agenda item is the bringing back the finance subcommittee, which I think is pretty apt. So unless there's any other comment, I think we can transition to that. Mr. Newkirk.
Yeah, thanks, Vice Chair. Just a request, could we get this PowerPoint? I was trying to take notes, but there's a ton of, I think, really helpful reference material for the end of year. So if we could get the PowerPoint, that'd be appreciated.
I can send you the PowerPoint. I can also, I can send you a spreadsheet with a more detailed breakdown of these numbers if you'd like, for you to really kind of dive into. So we'll do that for you. Sorry, I don't know why my camera doesn't seem to be working anymore, but.
Oh, go to meeting. Right. Well, since I was in a review, I think that's all we need to do, and I think we can transition to agenda item 7, finance subcommittee meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. France. So what we're looking for here is just to simply set a date for the DPC, the reincarnated version of the DPC Finance Committee, and we're looking at a date of Thursday, October 28th at 9 a.m. So if that meets the Finance Subcommittee's time and dates, we can go ahead and do that, and maybe you can all discuss that.
And Mr. Bossy, I think we had discussed potential members, or did we actually already in previous meeting lock in our members of the subcommittee?
For some reason, I thought we already did that, but I might be missing that. This is just looking at a date, but oh boy, Sarah, do you recall? Did we set up members?
I believe that we did.
Yeah.
I should be in the minutes from last week, but I believe that the committee did nominate a subcommittee.
Great.
So at this point, it would just be setting the meeting for that subcommittee.
Throw me a curveball there, Mr. France.
Sorry, no, it's just my faulty memory.
Yeah, I know I volunteered to be on it, and that date and time works for me. So
great. And for me as well. And I think it's Mr. Labrie, are you an alternate on that or not on it?
No.
Great. So our chair, who is on vacation, we'll hope that works for him.
Okay, so we'll go with October the 28th at 9 a.m. and we'll confirm with Chair Pinner upon his arrival back from vacation.
And was committee member Zarate an alternate, or who was our alternate?
Yes, I believe Mr. Zarate was nominated as the alternate in absentia, though, so he's here today. I don't know if he wishes to comment on that. But I do believe that because this is an agendized item, you need to take public comment on this and make a motion to actually set the meeting.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, is there any public comment?
There are no hands raised.
Right. So would anyone like to make a motion for our date?
I'll
Mr.
make a
Pratt.
motion to approve the date and time that was stated.
Great. Any second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Labrie. All right, roll call.
Committee Member France,
Yes.
Pratt,
Yes.
Labrie,
Yes.
Newkirk,
Yes.
Silver,
Yes.
and Zarate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. With that, we'll transition to agenda item 8, State Street Promenade update.
Mr. France, just quickly, per my message, at the record reflect, I need to step out at this point. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Labrie.
Okay, next on our agenda, we have a State Street Promenade update, and that will be conducted by Sarah. This is, as you all know, a constantly evolving process and program with the city, and we are definitely at the heart of that process and the program. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Clark for an update.
Thank you, Mr. Bossy. So we don't have a whole lot that is new for this month. As I'm sure you all noticed, we had our first rain event for the year on this past week. The parklets and the other structures in the on State Street held up pretty well. We did have a bit of ponding near some of them where they are in the drainage channel, but it was nothing significant, nothing that caused flooding. And one of those days was a fairly substantial downpour. So the day that we had the lightning storm. So we were pleased with how that held up, and our maintenance crews were able to get out there with our contractors and do some extra cleaning work after those storms to kind of get those areas where the debris tends to build up. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that as the season progresses. We've also had a lot of wind this past week. That's also something else that we keep an eye on, just with particularly umbrellas and the overhead structures, just making sure that those remain grounded and don't take flight. So that's something that we continue to work on. We are also working on, in a few different cases, areas where parklets or outdoor dining areas have been sort of abandoned, for lack of a better term, like the building is now vacant and the area is not being used or perhaps has fallen into disrepair. So we are working on posting those and getting the property owners to remove that material or removing it ourselves. So we are trying to kind of go back through now and do some cleanup, where parklets may be sort of sitting abandoned. We do want to remove those from the street and prevent that from becoming kind of blight. So that's something else we're working on. Of course, enforcement remains a high priority for us. We are continuing to address issues that are on the that are occurring on the sidewalks, with businesses placing materials that are not permitted on the sidewalks. The large majority of businesses, again, remain in compliance. We do have a few, unfortunately, that have been referred for a higher level of enforcement and for prosecution. So those are going to be now moving through the legal process for that. We have some others who may have abated initially and removed their things when we did our initial inspections from the sidewalks, but we're now sort of seeing some of those kind of creep out or pop up, particularly nights and weekends, when I think some of the businesses get the sense that they're not likely to be subject to inspection. So coming up next weekend, we're going to be doing some evening rounds with a few of our council members and taking a look at what the situation is when we are not on regular duty, and trying to develop strategies to address that as well going forward. The city is closing in on having a CASP under contract to assist us with the efforts to enforce and to bring the existing structures into compliance with ADA requirements. So that's something that we've been working on for a while, but it's finally getting wrapped up, and so we should be able to move forward with that level of enforcement coming up in the next month or so. So we're going to get that underway, and we are going to be planning some outreach prior to that enforcement to really kind of educate the businesses that are out there. You know, we've provided them with guidelines upon guidelines upon guidelines, but we're going to sort of try some new methods that hopefully will cross people's radars and catch people's attention, and really trying to get as much compliance as possible in a voluntary way without having to go through a citation and enforcement process. So we continue to make that a high priority. We continue to work on that going forward. And, you know, sort of on a parallel track, the city continues to evaluate and consider what the future of State Street and the future of on-street parklets might look like, whether those would be allowed to continue, and in what form, and what kind of shape that might take. So there have been a lot of internal discussions on this matter. I believe it's something that the State Street Advisory Committee is also going to be weighing in on. And it's something that we're sort of actively working on moving forward, and we'll keep you all updated as that progresses. So Brian, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add today.
No, I was just going to make sure that last part about the State Street Advisory Group and how we are very actively involved in that whole effort. They have Tess Harris, who is the State Street Master Planner, who was hired back in August. She has looped us in on that, so we are participating in the internal meetings on a regular basis. So we will keep you apprised of what's going on with the more long-term situation as far as State Street's concerned.
Are there any questions? Great. I'll ask for public comment before committee comment.
Okay, and I'm not seeing any hands raised.
All right, we're just racing through the agenda today. So I have a comment. We had actually discussed when we tried to set up this agenda item to discuss the 500 block. And unfortunately, that would require presentation by transportation staff that, for very understandable reasons, cannot present. There's just not bandwidth. The issue that I have is that we unfortunately created a problem at the 500 block in a short-term way that is really, I think, our responsibility to address in a short-term way, separate and before the larger multi-year State Street Advisory Committee, which is we have a promenade that is multi-use, except for one block, where the prior iterations of the parklet design basically precluded a multi-use promenade space. There was also a lot of kind of unwieldy and illegal and dangerous behavior earlier on in the promenade, coming out with kids doing wheelies and sort of aggressive bicycling. That actually there's a number of programs that have been addressing, like the Wheelie Wednesdays. Meanwhile, there's sort of a safety hazard where people are using the through route for our city, which is State Street, with no detour. And the reality is, whatever one's opinion of this might be as to what might be good, it's an ongoing hazard. And I think it's something that, that downtown parking should be taking a role in addressing. And either that's a detour or that's addressing the lack of the multi-use on the 500 block. And so my sort of, my concern kind of coming through is I understand that the detour would need to kind of be designed and addressed by transportation staff. But what is going on with 500 block kind of in that constrained space? Because we have sort of inadvertently created a blockage to what is our city's main thoroughfare for bikes and peds and our promenade.
Are you asking a question? I'm sorry, Mr. Fencer.
Yeah. So basically, the question I have is, we have parklets that are larger than make safe space for the passing zone in the middle. And so, what's our thinking here?
Well, we can go out and look at the 500 block and kind of move more of our enforcement efforts down there just to make sure everybody's abiding by the space constraints that they're allowed as far as our guidelines are concerned. You bring up some good points about safety, and we can work with our transportation staff to address those. We can get Mr. Bailey and Ms. Grant out there as well with us to take a look.
Great. My request would that be a priority, and also that for the DPC that those parklets be remeasured to see if they're in conformance with our current guidelines.
We will do that. Yes.
We can look at that. And
we'll get the fire truck to take another drive down State Street.
Yeah, that's one of the things we want to do is make sure they can fit. You know, one of the things that, and I know you all know this, that we struggle with is these are just guidelines. So, you know, we don't have a lot of teeth as far as enforcement. And again, it's easy to say that looking back, hindsight's 2020. This program was put out there to really save these businesses, and the city did an amazing job in reacting quickly. In all my years of government, I have never seen the city react that quickly. So it was an enormous benefit to numerous businesses downtown. Of course, then it's out there, and then we have to start enforcement, and we put together guidelines which are very thorough. But again, it's been difficult for us, and so but we continue to march forward and try and get compliance. Obviously, education's our biggest component, and if that doesn't work, then it's enforcement. So we can go out and make a renewed effort on the 500 block and check that out.
Cool. I really want to appreciate you all, and my apologies for sort of being obstinate here. One of the challenges we faced is turnover in staff. And so as so much of this has been provisional, there have been sort of ideas as to how to quickly address needs such as this, that unfortunately some of which there hasn't been continuity to come to completion. And so you all have taken so much on your shoulders, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for letting me be, you know, pretty obstinate about the importance of this issue on the 500 block.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Newkirk.
Thanks, Vice Chair. I had one kind of little comment. You know, the traffic engineers may have looked at this and feel like it's fine, but I just thought I'd flag, like, my concern as a driver on the Anapamu State Street intersection, particularly on the weekends. There's a lot of bike and pedestrian movement, and it's pretty tricky to get through that without it being signalized anymore. Because you have the pedestrians on both sides. They don't quite understand that they have the right of way, so sometimes they're going, and then sometimes they're not, and then the bicyclists in the middle of the street. It's pretty hard to track all the movement when you're in the car when it's busy on State Street. And I think probably during the week it works out all right, but I live on Anapamu, so to get across town, that's the intersection I'm going through. And I find that sometimes it's like you kind of have to go halfway through the intersection and then stop again. And kind of reassess the cyclists and pedestrians. I think it's kind of dicey for it to just be a stop sign, at least in those peak times of State Street activity. So I would suggest at some point, you know, having that looked at as whether that totally works at the busiest times. So that's just a comment I had. Thanks.
We will certainly take that to our colleagues in transportation and try to address that issue.
Well, any other comment? Well, thank you all so much. I think it's such a great illustration of how downtown parking is really downtown parking, paseos, promenade, and so much of the vitality of this our downtown zone. And I see a comment from Ms. Silver.
Yes, Yes. So thinking about the stop sign there, and again, my concerns about making things accessible. So the library is open again and other cultural sites are open again, a stop sign at a busy intersection is really hard for people with low vision and no vision. So take that into consideration too, please. Thanks.
You can do that. Thank you, Ms. Silver.
Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Great. With that, let's move to item number 9, program updates.
Okay, today with our program updates, so we have a quick update on our parking automations. These are 2 kind of standing items that we're dealing with, and hiring and staffing. And for that, I'd like to bring in Mr. Roy Forney.
Good morning, Vice Chair France, committee members. So just a little update on what we're doing with our automation efforts is LPR, right? And so our LPR system is now in place, and we are started testing last week, and are most definitely coming to realize that there's some obstacles to come through with this. So our LPR system was set to be able to raise the gate with free tickets, track license plates as they enter and exit, and determine fees, as well as be able to whitelist monthly permits. And so what we've realized is that with the gates going up at the end of the night and us closing a little earlier than normal because of staffing, that LPR system stops working once those gates go up. So just a couple issues that we're trying to work through in regards to working with our the SCIDATA techs and trying to figure out how we can kind of mediate some of these issues. So for example, a vehicle's driving out at the end of the night when our gates are up, it tracks that it came in. Excuse me, of course I have a phone that's ringing in here.
Just shows all the hard work that's being handled by the
One of our ambassador phones is going off. I apologize if I could figure out how to turn this off. So with that, once this customer leaves and then they drive back in the next day, it's tracking that time as if they've never left. So when a fee comes up the next day, it's for 2 days worth of parking. So we're just trying to figure that out, how we can get that fee to be canceled and just moving forward. So of course, a lot of hoops to jump through. This is something that nobody really does, especially in this area when it's regards to tracking. I know Paseo Nuevo has LPR as well, but it's more based on just really letting vehicles out for free if they're under a certain time. We want ours to be able to do more and moving towards that look of being able to automate some of the parking lots. And so that's kind of where we are. So this is kind of a very interesting position to be in a sense of just trying to get this testing to work and get the system to work the way we want to. So that is our kind of update on automation. There have been some signs ordered for 5.2, which is that, oh man, I need to get this thing out of here. Apologies. So with regards to automating our 5.2 exit, signs have been ordered. That is the exit over in our lot 5 or the lot that's near Victoria Court. There is that exit that leads right out onto Victoria Street. We're going to be signing that as a self-service exit. The signs are ordered. They should be in shortly. So it's just one of the pieces to the puzzle of doing those secondary lots. That was first exit that we wanted to automate. And so we're moving forward with that. We'll have more of an update once those signs get in and we open that up. With regards to staffing, and that was kind of a more of a major piece of what we are hearing today with all the budget concerns and not being able to collect the revenue that we want. Yeah, I just really want to explain this and just kind of put a better picture on what's taking place. So last month we were able to let the committee know that we were somewhere around that 45 employee mark. We're really trying to get somewhere to 80 or 90. And guess what? This month we're at 46 employees, and I'm going to explain why. We hired and there were 8 employees that started since September. So 8 employees sounds like a great number, right? Like, you know, in the month, in terms of the process of hiring, it's very difficult right now. It takes typically anywhere from 3 weeks. What,
Uh-oh.
8 employees to resign. So it kept us pretty much status quo. So with the resignations that we had 5 that received new jobs. We had 1 that left for school, and we had 2 that just stopped reporting to work. So again, with that, I think it's important to note that our great customer service that is out there in the lots, we're kind of getting poached for our employees. There's a lot of businesses and other places that are really trying to hire just as much as we are. And so we're seeing our employees just kind of leave in that sense. So we're doing a lot of advertisement and recruitment for our staffing. We're currently online. We have our recruitment postings in our parking lots. We are posted there at UCSB as well as CC, and we have postings in all the local high schools and their career centers. So we're really trying to do the best we can to get people in here. And I want to commend the staff on conducting as many interviews as we're doing, because it's interviews all week. And again, we hired 8, got 8 on, and we had 8 that left. Granted, in months before, it seemed like we were, you know, especially with school ending and the new school year starting in August, it seemed like we had more that were leaving that were actually coming on. So I'm a little bit more optimistic that we can start getting our numbers up. We have a few on deck, and I'd like to be over 50 by the end of the month. So that is pretty much the staffing update. Most willing to open it up to any questions that anybody has. I hope that was extensive enough just to kind of understand what we're dealing with here when it comes to trying to get employees in. There are conversations, and we've been in talks of just doing everything we can, potentially even raising the hourly rate to keep our employees, because that's kind of the big one that we're seeing. You know, downtown parking, since I've been here, was always about $1 above minimum wage. Once minimum wage caught up to us, they were just, you know, and we weren't making as much money as we were out in the parking lots. We kind of kept that. We stopped that and just kept it at minimum wage, and we're starting to see that kind of come back and bite us with the idea that people are getting poached, and you know, they're just finding jobs that pay more. So we're looking at raising the hourly wage. We really hope that we can be at a level that we could extend our hours and really collect that revenue that is out in the parking lots.
Thank you, Mr. Forney. Are there any questions on these updates?
Hey, Roy, this is Ruben.
Ruben, good morning.
Should I turn my camera on? Would that be easier?
Sure.
That would be great.
I just had a quick question. Are the lots still no more than 24 hours a week you can work?
Yes, I think you're referring to our hourly staff are subjected to only being able to work 999 hours a year. So if we keep them the whole year, and that's how we do it, we don't make it seasonal work where we just work them to death and then we let them go and then they have to reapply. We really spread those 999 hours out amongst the entire year, which breaks down around 20 hours a week. So we're really trying to keep our staff below that mark or around 20 hours and not exceed that too much. Granted, we're doing that, right, to really try to keep the parking lots open as long as possible. But there's so much turnover with the new employees coming in, they get new hours. So it's still working for us. But yes, we are subjected to the only 20 hours per week for our hourly employees.
Yeah, when you mix that and minimum wage, it's so hard to live in Santa Barbara that it's like,
it's been extremely difficult to hire. I've never seen anything like it. And you know, our team since the beginning conducts so many interviews, reviews so many applications, and this has been the toughest time I've ever seen in the 25 years I've been here in terms of staffing.
And then also we look with like the massive PR push of that the lots are closing and that they're getting automated. Maybe people don't want to invest their time in this position because there's a question mark of how long it will be here still.
Ruben, that makes a great point. And I really don't know and can't really measure if or how much that has affected the idea of employees trying to get here. What I've come to realize, I think, with what we're doing, even with the implementation of LPR and going to a version of automation, is we're still going to need people. We're still going to need people. There's still going to, somebody's going to be needed to be available to go to the lot. I mean, even if it doesn't become a lot operator, it's a lot monitor, there's still, going to be a very slow process. I don't see our number getting extremely low and never seeing a number where we just don't have any employees and everything is just working perfectly, because we're starting to realize that it's going to take people to make this work. We're just trying to figure out exactly what that is to make it happen. So yes, I could see that being a little bit of an obstacle of people applying, but we would hope with maybe a wage increase, it'd get better.
I agree.
Thank you, Ruben.
Any other questions? Well, I will ask for.
Yes,
Oh,
yes, I do have another question. So when people leave, do you do exit interviews? Do you know why they're leaving?
Committee member Silver. So we do. So I guess the answer to that is we do not do exit interviews, but our staff are really good about filling out a resignation form, or at least giving us a letter, and they're pretty good about letting us know why. So again, our staff majority a younger group, just because it is part-time hourly work. We're seeing, and again, we're starting to track this, so we should have better numbers later or in the future, but we are seeing we're losing a lot of staff to other jobs and or school are the two main reasons. It's only seldom that we have people that just stop showing and never call us back and don't really let us know why, but that also does happen. But we do not conduct exit interviews.
Well, given what's happening with the economy altogether, I think raising salary rates is inevitable if you want to keep people.
Yes, ma'am, we do agree. Thank you, Committee Member Silver.
I have a question to follow up. Is it an administrative or a policy decision for the hourly wage? In other words, how does that get decided?
Vice Chair France, we're most definitely trying to figure that out right now. I don't think it necessarily needs to go to council, but we most definitely need to get approval. So we're in the works of just collecting all of our data that we need, how much more we may make within the lots if we are staffed fully to the extent that we want to be staffed, versus how much a wage increase would hit our budget. So we're just trying to gather all that information first and then take it to our bosses, the public works director and so forth, just to make sure we're all on the same page before we move forward. So we want to get all of our ducks in a row before we make that decision of raising our hourly wage. But I think it should be as simple as just getting approval there and then moving forward.
Yeah, and if I can chime in, Mr. France, Roy touched on it. So there is a process involved, and generally wage increases and things like this go through the city's budget process. All the different departments, whether that's a reclassification of job positions or wage increases, it goes through the budget process. We don't want to wait for that budget process, because then that doesn't give us an increase until July 1. We'd like to get out ahead of that. So that's what we're trying to push on our end of it. Yeah. And so we are, as Roy mentioned, putting together a memo, analyzing the increase versus what we see as the increase in revenues that getting additional people on, how that will help. And we're running that through, we'll eventually run that through the Public Works Director, and that makes its way over to Human Resources. And so it's just a process we have to go through, but we are engaged in that at the current time.
Thank you. I will just share my own experience as a committee member, that we also, to Mr. Forney's point, we did prioritize being above minimum wage and adjusting that. And I don't really recall, obviously my memory is fallible, but I don't really recall us never shifting that priority. So Of course, minimum wage has changed and we all need to keep up. So,
Thank you.
did I take public comment? There was no public comment. Ms. Clark, do we do public comment on this item?
Yes, we do generally take public comment on this item, but there are no hands raised.
Great. Comments from the committee? Well, I will just share. Ms. Silver.
So being new on the committee, and you refer to former priorities, is there some place for those of us who are new can check back to see what the standing priorities are for this committee?
That's a great question. Ms. Clark?
So at this point, we don't have any sort of formalized, document of committee priorities or anything like that. If you wanted information on the history of the committee, what we've discussed in the past, of course, our minutes are available online. And then for the ones, that are further back, we should be able to produce those internally if you're interested. But in the past, we've done, and it hasn't been for a few years, but we have actually done retreats and sort of similar exercises with the committee, where the committee really had a chance to kind of dive in and do some of that priority setting and discuss some of these issues in more depth, and what the committee might like to see for downtown parking. That hasn't happened in a few years, so we don't really have anything recent that would guide that, but doing such an exercise in the future might be not a bad idea. So.
Well, thank you. I guess that tells me the answer is no. So, Mr. France, thank you for bringing it up, because obviously costs have been going up all over, and I don't see that the normal budgeting process necessarily needs to be followed in a case where everything is sliding fast, but we are holding fast to the old ways until we get approval. It seems to me it makes things very difficult for staff to hire new people under these conditions. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Well, I will agree. I think I certainly, and I bet most of us all here, I don't think this is a good motion time, since this is an update, but certainly we hope for all of the administrative support to allow you all to do your jobs and for us to get staffed as we need to. So thank you. I just really want to appreciate, and I know I add to the list, but all that is that downtown parking is taking on in a time of major transition and upheaval with both the pandemic and whatever the post-pandemic reality is going to be. So, license plate, this transition is a major one and is super tricky, and you all are just taking it on about as boldly as you possibly can, right? But it's really important to the long-term sustainability of the program, and our staffing plan is crucial to the health and long-term sustainability of this program. I mean, we are a reflection of the people, and you all have kept this program going, and otherwise I don't know if we could have navigated through these very difficult waters. So thank you for these updates. Thank you, Mr. Bossi, Ms. Clark. Thank you so much, Mr. Forney. And with no other comments, no other comments. One,
I have a
Mr.
question.
Pratt.
Yeah, I actually have a question, and maybe it's too soon and maybe we wouldn't all agree, but would it be helpful to staff if we made a motion to show support from the committee in possibly raising the hiring rate or something of that sort?
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Pratt, we appreciate that. We really do. I think as far as the agenda is concerned, I don't think we can do that at this point in time. Yeah. But we'll keep you apprised of our process, and if we think that extra support is needed, we will definitely agendize something along those lines, and hopefully you will all agree and we can move forward. And I just want to also add, I want to hop on to Mr. Francis' comments. You know, I came down here, or up here, however you want to look at it, back in May, and I've worked with downtown parking my entire career, and I've had the utmost respect for all these folks. But I am amazed every day at, along what Mr. France said, the depth and breadth of what these people do. So I just want to assure you, as you already know, you have an amazing staff here. They do amazing work, and they are working very hard. They are understaffed. And again, as Mr. Forney said, we're trying to get that up to speed, but these folks do great work, and they amaze me every day. So I'm really honored to have just played a small role in trying to help move things forward. So you all are in good hands with these folks. So I really appreciate all the work they do.
Here, here. Well, with that, any other last comment? Great, thank you. I'd like to move us to agenda item 10. Any announcements?
We do have a couple of announcements, exciting ones, kind of interesting, both on the opposite end of the career spectrum. And I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Forney to provide those announcements for us. Mr. Forney.
Good morning. I'm sorry. One more time, Brian, I missed that piece. I was over here trying to get these phone to stop ringing, and I missed what you were asking.
The announcements regarding staff.
We
okay, you weren't going to do that. Okay, we've got a miscommunication.
Staffing announcements, we're done.
Okay, Sarah, do you want to hop on here and do those for us?
Sure. Sorry, Brian. I thought that you were.
No worries.
Sorry. So we do have some personnel changes coming up. Our long-serving committee secretary, Mindy Jackson. Mindy, if you want to pull your camera up, has just announced that she'll be retiring effective, what is it, November 5th?
Yes.
You said?
Oh, wow.
So we thank and congratulate her on how many years of service, Mindy?
22 plus.
Wow.
22 years. So we're very sad to lose her, but excited for all her new adventures that she's going to get to have in retirement. So this is going to be her last meeting with the committee, calling the roll. So right now we're going to be training and bringing on Ethan Pitney. So Ethan, if you can turn your camera and your microphone on so you can meet the committee. So Ethan Pitney is the program's Downtown Parking's new accounting assistant. So he started, I think, about a month ago now. Prior to that, he was working as an hourly accounting assistant down in the engineering division. So we're very fortunate and glad to have him. And he's going to be taking on some additional administrative support duties for downtown parking. And so we have him here today, and he's being trained for running these meetings. And so you'll be seeing him in the future. And then we also have a few other folks on the line here today, Rochelle Pegg and Liz Mason. Rochelle is the administrative supervisor down in Public Works, and Liz is an administrative assistant. And so they are going to be also helping and doing some cross training to provide support to these meetings. So a little bit, some changes coming up with our support staff. So be on the lookout for Ethan's for emails coming from Ethan in the future regarding meeting scheduling, agendas, things like that, your availability, and you might see those coming from Rochelle or Liz on occasion for backup. So.
Well, welcome to our new staff, and congratulations and kudos for Mindy Jackson on your retirement. Thank you so much for your service to the city, and I hope we can have a proper celebration of your time with us and all you've done for transportation and downtown parking. Are there any other announcements?
No, there are not. And sorry about that miscommunication. That was my bad.
Which Forney's just like, wait.
Just when we talk about
to say goodbye. No one wanted to say goodbye.
Exactly. So we are good with announcements for the time being.
Well, can I just add that we are also in the midst of an election for our fair city, and I hope that everyone who can vote is voting. That's my announcement. And I don't know if that's within the rules. And with that, I will move to agenda item 11, which is our adjournment. So thank you all for your time this morning and your work. This meeting is adjourned.